Welcome to the Speckle Park podcast, where we look behind the scenes at the incredible breed designed to maximise profit, minimise inputs to build a high-performance commercial herd. This episode is sponsored by Speckle Park, bred for lasting performance. For first access to sale information, visit jadspecklepark.com.au and subscribe to become a Jad Insider.
Hello, my name is Amy Dickens and I'm hosting this episode of the Speckle Park podcast with our guest, Greg Ebbeck. Greg is a third-generation cattleman from the New South Wales Southern Highlands with over 50 years' experience breeding seedstock cattle on his Six Star Speckle Park property at Bundanoon. The former renowned Hereford stud breeder first came across the Speckle Park breed in Canada back in 2006. He imported the first Speckle Park embryos and semen to Australia, was involved in establishing the Breed Society for Australia and New Zealand, and used various means to help market the new breed on Aussie soil. Greg has bred and exhibited hundreds of champion cattle at major livestock shows and carcass competitions here and overseas, and he has exported and imported genetics and live cattle to all parts of the globe. Greg is a highly regarded international judge of beef cattle and has had a lifelong passion for the development of beef cattle genetics. Welcome to the Speckle Park podcast, Greg.
Morning, Amy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, that's good. It's a lovely day. A nice day for it. We could do with it a rain, but it's a lovely day.
So let's start from the beginning. Tell us about your childhood. What was your earliest agricultural memory, and did anything from your childhood inspire you to take the career path you chose?
Yeah, I would think that probably the first thing I can remember was when I was about 4 or 5, sitting on an old single-bench Chamberlain tractor, sowing crops out at Temora at that stage with Dad and a good mate of his that had a property together. That's one of the enduring memories, like literally a memory. Can always remember that happening, sitting there and with the dust flying and no cab, of course, in those days. And then I suppose in regards to the animal part of things was being around Dad when I was probably the first thing I can remember was calving a cow down and seeing a newborn calf when I was about the same age, 5, 6, 7, something like that. So that's the oldest memories I can get going back that don't have a lot to do with everyday stuff now.
So you had a mixed farming operation out at Temora in southern New South Wales?
It was mainly sheep and wheat that Dad and his friend had, and then they had a few cows. They had a few milking cows and half a dozen beef cattle. They had old shorthorn cows, if I remember rightly.
So can you provide listeners with an overview of your career to date?
Going way back, it's been my love ever since I can ever remember. Working with cattle started where it was a career, where it was my doings that made me any pocket money, was going with an old agent at Young, Joe Barguana, and we'd drive down to Nowra and buy day-old calves, and we'd bring them home. I'd keep 4 or 5 at home, and I'd potty them. So I was doing a lot of work with baby calves, not necessarily any breeds at that stage. And then as I went through school, the calves we had a little property at Young as well. From there, those calves went out. We fed them further. We turned them over. I turned them over, and that money went in. And then in the mid-70s, while I was still at high school, I started a Pole Hereford stud, which was Doombiddy, which we had right through till 2011. So it was always there. Dad was in that with me, and my grandfather had already had, going back, which I can't remember, of course, he had a purebred shorthorn herd. I started the Pole Hereford stud with my father at about 14 or 15, I think it was.
Why did you choose Pole Hereford?
I don't know. I think it was at that stage, it was mainly because I had actually pottied some calves, and the Herefords grew well, they weighed well, and they got me more money than anything else in those days. Probably the reason for it. And I also was working and mucking around with an old stud out there called Dan and Billa, which is a famous old Hereford stud. And the cows that we worked with were just so quiet and easy to manage. And, yeah, I just loved the look of old Hereford cows.
So how did that grow from there?
I started to buy more purebred cows, better quality cows. It grew to a situation where in the early 80s, there was a big change in the type of cattle that was coming. This was the beginning of the first of the North American cattle coming in, the first imports in, which went through the old Cocos Island, which took them 6 or 8 months. I was lucky enough to be taken under the wing of the late Don Anderson of Inverary, Hereford fame. And Don was the first guy up there in Queensland that was starting to do ET work. And I can remember doing surgical ET with the cows on a big silver table, and we were all decked out in white gear. It was just like a hospital, and everything was done surgically. Open the cow up, bring their ovaries out, pull the eggs out, take them away, put them in, take them to a recip. So that was part of where I started to become more interested in the artificial breeding part of things and the way that we could find good genetics in the cows and multiply those genetics quite quickly. So in the beginning, and then we had also had dealings with James Londrigan at Mudgee, who was also doing those early ET programs. From there, Don bought out the first of the North American bulls. He sort of was the godfather of getting the new imports after they'd been closed for so many years, back when the old Vern blood and things were coming out from England. That was when the interest for me in artificial breeding played a big part on how I developed my Hereford herd. From there, we just grew. Doombiddy, we did a lot of showing in those days, mainly to get out there in front of the public and get your name known. From the 80s through till 2011, with the Herefords, we showed virtually non-stop. I think last Sydney was my 56th straight Sydney Royal show. Even though we didn't have a big team, that's where we've been. We had teams back in the 80s and 90s of 20, 25. And we were in classes of Hereford bulls under 20 with 35. I remember one year we had 56 bulls in one class.
Wow.
We had the Hereford sales there where we had anything up to 250 bulls for sale at the old Sydney showgrounds. One year there was over 400 Hereford and Pole Herefords, 600 all up. So that part of it was all just a part of breeding and showing purebred cattle. Then we went from there to having our own commercial bull sales. I got interested in probably the mid-90s in carcase shows. We showed a lot of steers from here at Langloth and here at Bundanoon. We had a good friend of ours who was an excellent old Scottish guy who did a lot of good feeding. And we exhibited steers at Sydney show probably for 25 years in a row as soon as they started doing steer shows.
What did you learn from that exposure?
In those days, it was all by eye. So what you were doing, you weren't scanning those steers to find out how much muscle they had in them or whether they had enough fat cover. It was all by actual feel and eye. So we also found out the ones that fed easy, that did convert. It was easy enough to know the bloodlines that worked and the ones that didn't work within that breed at that stage. So that was important because that gave me my own insight into things. It gave me a really good grasp of why those cattle perform better. And then we always went through to see our carcasses hung up. So we were on the ball with that. And then after they were killed and hung up in those days, you could actually then see it on a rail, where by now these days we can actually see a lot of it through ultrasound. That was where you got your sense of your eye was telling you what you should be breeding to get those steers.
So when did you stop breeding the Herefords, Pole Herefords?
We had our dispersal in October of 2011, and we had already started breeding Speckle Park in 2000. Our first calves, Six Star calves, were born in 2009. The D models were the first cattle born here in Australia.
Okay, there you go. So tell us about how you came across the breed, Speckle Park.
Well, I've been going to Canada and America since about 1982. I think my first trip there was 1982 when I was 2021 or something like that. I also went across to the Calgary Stampede a few times in the summer trips. So I was privy to getting to know a lot of the very good beef cattle breeders throughout Canada, more so than America. The American part of my ventures was later in the 80s. The first time we saw Speckle Parks, or I saw Speckle Park, were in about 2003, 2004, at the Calgary Stampede. And they were not a breed at that stage, of course, or they weren't a recognised breed. And it was mainly because we were following the carcasses go through from on the hoof to on the hook. Now, the Speckle Parks in those days were outnumbered by Shorthorns, Herefords, Angus, and other breeds as well, but there was very, very few there. Maybe 10, maybe some years 6, maybe some years 12 in those early 2000s. But surprisingly, when I got home from going over there in the summer, I'd get the week after or whatever, I would follow it up to see who won the actual on the hooks. And all of a sudden, there'd be these Speckle Parks. They were standing 17th, 19th, 21st in their class live. And then all of a sudden, they were winning their classes and then winning their championships in the carcasses. And that sort of really got me intrigued. So those years were the first years. And then from there, 2006, 2007, they won Grand Champion, if I remember rightly, the right years, close enough to those years. They won the carcass competition as in champions. And they also won some taste tests, because at the Calgary Stampede, they actually had taste tests of those carcasses. The taste tests there were blind as in what the people were tasting, but they were everyday consumers. They were housewives from Calgary, and there might have been 20 of them just selected out of the crowd, and they did a blind taste test with a toothpick and a piece of meat, and you pick what you want and tell us which one you like the best. They won those taste tests hand down, just won it every year for about 4 years.
And so it was also in 2007 that the Canadian government formally recognised the Speckle Park breed as a standalone breed. What did that decision do for you in ultimately helping you to decide to bring the breed out to Australia?
Well, in those few years in 2003, 4, 5, and then when they started to win, I started to get very interested in the breed for those reasons, the carcass and the meat side of things. And then I started to look into it while I was there doing my Hereford thing. I started to scout around to ask about what the breed was all about, and I found out that it was in the evolving stage. So we had an evolving breed. So Speckle Park were evolving for 14 years prior to them being designated breed at the end of 2006. And in that 4, 5, 6, well, 4 and 5 actually years 2004 and 5, I was saying to myself, well, these cattle are really good, and I think we need to bring them out here somehow or other. I mean, we were bringing embryos out from from Herefords a lot. We had brought a lot of semen out for the last 20 years, but prior to that with Herefords, and a lot of embryos. So in the winter trip of 2006, I had spoken to what I considered at that stage, I'd done a little bit of reconnaissance on the better breeders and the people that had bigger herds of purebreds. Well, they were purebreds, but they weren't recognised breed at that date. But we had a meeting between Kodiak Acres, River Hill, Spots and Sprouts, and Nodder Ranch with Dr. Don Miller, who was the renowned embryologist in Canada. And I organised a meeting to have with the 4 of those studs, with the idea of saying, well, we would like to be able to flush cows, pick out the cows we wanted, and then explain to them how it was done and what sort of money would be available to them for us to start buying embryos off them. The trouble was, in November of 2006, when we had the meeting, which was quite amazing, not one of those bigger studs, or those gentlemen that were doing it, and there wasn't anybody in Speckle Park, had ever flushed a cow. They'd never flushed a cow. And out of those 4 biggest people that I was dealing with, nobody had even AI'd a cow. So there was stuff, all semen available to use. So that year, knowing full well that the government was to allow the breed to become the breed, I made introductions to those guys to say, right, I want to come out and go through your herds again and pick out cows, and I want to flush them. I'm going to probably have to get some bulls that are going to have to go into centre to use as AI sires, just for the protocol of getting the embryos out. They were all very happy with that. They were excited because it was the first time that there was any interest in the breed to go forward. At that stage, I think there might have been 30 studs in Canada, 40 studs. All the paperwork was done by hand. Even the registrations were coming up to be fully registered by the time the government said yes, were all done by hand. And Dale and John Herbert. And Dale herself was the treasurer and secretary and jack of all trades, and she was doing that, all that paperwork, getting that up for those 14 years of the evolving breed, and she was doing that all by hand. And the amount of cattle that were being registered, she did all that. She wrote that down by hand, every pedigree. And then they started at the end of 2005, 2006, they started to get some printed pedigrees. 2006, it was the starting point. We knew that the government was going to give them the status of a purebred. Now, that was the only breed that's been allowed to become a purebred breed in Canada, which is quite strange, but their regulations are different to ours. I mean, we've been able to breed whatever we wanted to breed here. You know, I was very good friends with Rick Pizzaturo for years. Rick started the Mandalong Specials. He had a lot to do with the square metres. And there's been a myriad of other breeds bred in Australia. There was no government intervention. Over there, they were governed by the Animals and Pedigrees Act. And these was the only breed that went through all the hoops to become a purebred. They have a very long history of being pure now. I mean, we had a lot of people in those days, well, you know, they just said, well, they were just all crossbreds. Well, they weren't crossbreds because, you know, they were bred up and they had lines and they had, you know, we had lots of ancestors there even before they became a purebred breed.
And anybody who breeds using Speckle Park know just how potent that, people say it's a crossbred, and anybody who uses them knows, well, that's not the case by how potent they are in a first cross, passing on all the goodness that comes with the breed.
Correct. And I've always said that one of the biggest attributes we've got is that, yes, they were made up of a myriad of other breeds. I mean, it's not as a matter of they just crossed an Angus with a shorthorn to get spots. There's so many other breeds, as people that are listening to this would realise these days, that there was a lot of cattle that went into that breed, but they all lined up in the early 2000s and late 90s when it became an evolving breed, that it had to be put down and you had to keep using Speckle Park or speckled cattle as such. So those guys that did the original work over there, they knew how good those bulls were as to produce F1 cattle out of Herefords, Angus, Shorthorns, mainly. Some Charolais, they started to use, you know, what they call European cattle. Those Euro cattle over there produced amazing calves by Speckle Park. They softened them, they put more round muscle to them, and they got that. If you can get heterozygous and we get 25% hybrid vigour, that's about the best you can ever get, which it is, as far as genetics is concerned. Speckle Park hit it all the time, and that's why the F1s are so good. They just have that ability to give you that 25% punch. And luckily enough, we also have the quality of the insanely great quality meat that we've got in it, and the carcass attributes are thrown with that hybrid vigour of extra weight.
That's right. Yep. So if we go to that first shipment that you brought out to Australia, was that both embryos and semen?
Yes.
And so talk us through that first drop in Australia.
I spent 6 months in 2006 running up to signing deals with these guys. In the meantime, I've got to regress a little bit. In the meantime, we were waiting for it to be a purebred breed, and we then started the long process of starting SBI. At that stage, probably digressing a little bit here, but it's going to be a lot easier to give it give you the full picture by doing this. SBI, which is Speckle Park International, I thought that the biggest problem was, which it was in those days, there was only 30 or 40 people, 50 people breeding Speckle Park. And how many were going to breed purebred Speckle Park? Who knows? That we're going to continue on after they become a defined breed. But we knew there was some people that were interested in Ireland and England. The Americans, never heard of them, didn't know anything about them, had no reason. There was virtually Australia that knew about them. New Zealand knew about them, only via me doing a few things and telling them what I was going to do. And they were Hereford mates, same as, we've got, Mark McKenzie and Bruce. And they said, well, we want to be on board too. We want to get into it. So, Mark, Bruce, myself, and the Six Star, our crew that was there, decided we would do that. So those calves were out of cows that I selected, a group of 40 cows were the first lot. Don Miller did all the collections. We shipped them in as soon as we knew that it was defined breed. And we had also been accepted as a breed here through the RAS, which was not specifically needed, but it gave you traction. They had been recognised as a breed that could be shown. Not that that was the main reason for getting them into the RAS, but it was to have us known as a breed. Those calves were born in July, August of 2007. So they, as I said, were D models. We had a lot of contractors because we didn't have enough recips to do it ourselves. So we had cooperator herds, and the biggest one we had was just down the road here near Marula, and we calved 40 down there, I think. We calved about 20 at home, and then we also had another cooperator herd down at Wodonga, where we calved another 60. And when we first started to get those calves, that was very exciting. And the people that were calving them, because nobody had ever seen one, apart from a handful of us that were people that went across to Canada and saw them, there was nobody else saw them. You could take some photos and show them what they were, but it wasn't the same thing as actually carving them down. So that first crop of calves and they were really good calves, like extremely good calves. So, our joinings we did, they worked. I was really happy with what we got. And to tell you the truth, there's a lot of those descendants, and it's not that long ago that some of those old D cows were still going at 16 years old and still producing well. And the descendants of those, of course, make up virtually 80% or 90% of the basis of what we've got now. So, that first year was just exciting, very exciting. So that year in 2007 led us to actually getting the cattle out and about.
How was the breed received when you took those first Speckle Park in Australia out in the public domain?
Our first outing was at Mudgee Field Days of that year. And what we did, we got a double site, and we had a truckload of recips with 4 or 5 month old calves. And we had some friends down there that we took the recips and the calves down. And then we took 12, 14 calves off the recip mums and left them at our friend's property, and we drove them in on a trailer behind the truck. Well, I can remember arriving at the Mudgee Field Days, and there would have been 200 people waiting because we had straw out in the round pen and water and everything else, and our tent where we were saying an introduction of Speckle Park to Australia. It'll be here on Friday at 9 a.m. And we rocked up with that. There was literally 200 people waiting to watch them come off the back of the little trailer behind our ute. So it was exciting. The people oohed and ahed, and as we all know, they are pretty cattle, and they were either all whites or all speckled, and they were thick. I mean, they were the typical, what we know, thick-assed Speckle Parks. They were just brilliant. Big tops on them, only 4 months old. And the first comments that we got off anybody that was there that was a cattleman was, wow, they look like old-fashioned good beef calves. Because there was a lot of cattle that were around that were getting too tall and not enough depth and thickness to them. But you could see in the calves that they They were just chunks. They were really thick, really thick. And those people that saw them were just blown away.
And so from there, you began showing them to get the breed more exposure each year as we went forward. And then when did you have your first sale?
Our first sale was 2011 at Meadow Flat near Bathurst with one of our partners from Speckle Park Cattle Company. So that's where the SPC comes from with our prefix, Speckle Park Cattle Company, at George Cousley's place. And that actually was the first on-property sale of Speckle Parks in the world. Nobody else had ever had a sale. They had a sale at Agribition, which had about between 8 or 10 or 12, sometimes up to 20 at Agribition, which was called their national sale. But nobody had ever had an on-property sale where they actually had enough to have a sale for a start, especially bulls. There wasn't enough people breeding enough bulls to have a sale. It wasn't on. So that was the first on-property sale. And it was, I've got photos of it, we've got videos of it, but it was packed. We had over 400 people there. They went to every state bar, Western Australia at that stage. People came from everywhere. It was a great sale, and it was a good introduction for the breed. They didn't make silly, stupid money. They made good money, but that was the beginning of actually getting bulls out to the public.
And I met George with yourself the following year, 2012, at George's property. I wrote a story as a curious freelance journalist for the Furrow magazine, which John Deere produced.
That's right.
About Speckle Park, and it went as a cover story about the breed, and that was 2012.
That's right. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Long time ago now.
Yeah, and that's So that's quite a few years before you actually got stuck into it yourself.
Well, we started commercially that year, but the stud wasn't until we bought our first embryos in 2016. Yeah, so but commercially was that year. I guess if I'm to go back to those early genetics you brought out to Australia, can you talk us through those early genetics and what worked best?
Yeah, sure. I spend a lot of time on the cow side of things, which I think is imperative. And I spend a lot of time, and when I say time, I mean a lot of time. I would be making 2, 3, 4 trips in the summertime. So I did a couple of years where we were at the beginning, we were calving cows, so I could actually see the cows in full production early on. And it was, in the snow, it was minus 20, minus 40 or whatever. And then out of that, I would go back when the calves were being weaned, just before they're being weaned. And I selected cows that I liked before they calved, and then more so they got stamped in my head and my eye. The cows that I used were the cows that had the best calves on them. Some of them weren't ugly ducklings, but they certainly weren't show winners or anything else. And there was very few that were anything to do with shows. They were picked purely on physical attributes, soundness and feet and all the things. But we needed a lot of them. So that's why those first 5 or 6 years were all taken from those guys that we were working with early on. And they were good cows, very good cows. They were the years where we actually found uniques and good girls. We found 54P, faux finish, the Lightning Ladies, Spanish Angels, all those bloodlines. At that stage, they didn't actually have family names. They didn't keep family names to a degree. So when I found those cows, I had to get a pedigree to go back, because a Spanish Angel could have been called Lucy and her grandmother could have been, Rachel. But, I mean, by the time we got them, that's when we started using the family names exclusively. So whatever those cows were out of those cows were by the bulls that I used. So the bulls we bought to get semen to start with we bought him. I actually bought the bull before we even knew we could actually get it out here, which was Lacerda, with John and Dale Herbert and the Goodfellows. We had 68L, we had John Wayne, and we then moved on in the next year. We bought 26P. But those first lot were specifically 68L, Lacerda, and John Wayne. And then we branched out pretty quickly after that, though, because we then went into Traffic Jam, and then a son went in Walker, and then we found what I was always thought was the best bull we had, which was Stands Alone, who was he was out of a 68L cow anyway, but they were all the attributes that I was looking for anyway. Those first embryos were put together by all site. There was no numbers or anything. There was just nothing like that in those days.
So as part of the process of establishing a new breed in Australia, that also required you to start the Breed Society, as you touched on earlier, Speckle Park International. How challenging was that process back in the early days?
Well, luckily, our partners, or one of our partners at that stage, Mark Baker, a very, very smart man. He was a solicitor, and he knew of the rules and regulations of how to get a breed started and what we should do. It was tough. It was very expensive to get it even just registered and all the things we needed to do. We patented names. We did a lot of stuff that needed to be done so that it was secure for SBI. So SBI was really just a branch of Six Star. Our board consisted of 3 different groups of 2 people, ourselves, and then we had the Coosleys, and then the other people. We're all Hereford breeders, by the way, and they would come from Canimbla, which is Mark Baker and Mike Todd. So that consisted of 6 board members, and our first board meeting was, I think, in 2007 or something like that. But yeah, time consuming to get the rules and regulations, to get the constitution drafted. We looked at the Angus Society, we looked at the Hereford Society, Pole Hereford Society, the Canadian Association, and we tried to put a group of rules and regulations that went with the constitution that took a little bit of everybody's out. Then we had to then get and fund a secretariat. We needed somebody to do some secretarial work. We then had to have meetings with ABRI, because from day one we wanted to be part of ABRI and have a Speckle Park breed plan from day one. So that we had to go in and do that, pay for that, do all those things. And then the setup of the society took place with a lot of work from Mark Baker on the legal side of things and just the finances of it. Six Star funded all of that for the first 4 years because we didn't have any members. Six Star is the inaugural member. It's still membership number 1. And for probably 2 years, we may have had 20 members. But in that case, we allowed people to be a member if they owned embryos. And then we changed it that you had to have at least, 1 live animal, then it was 3 live animals. That grew like topsy. That part of it was just a part of the process of getting it bigger. Mm. But to give you an idea, it cost us well over $300,000 to get all that up and running. And then we funded SBI because we wanted the society to be seen as the main running portion. So SBI did the advertising. SBI paid the bills. So Six Star funded all that.
So if we move across to talk about Six Star, what are your breeding objectives at Six Star Speckle Park and what do you do to help achieve those?
Well, my objective always was to breed carcass cattle with performance. I knew from having experience of it that the breed had great carcass, has amazing meat, and which really, ever since we've been in it, and it's just grown, it's the best meat in the world. It's the best steak in the world. And people keep going, oh, yeah, Greg, BS. No. And you know yourself, and the people that are our members now know because they've tasted themselves. They also, we've got paddock to plate everywhere that are doing it. And we had so many times that we did taste tests. When Wattle Grove came in with us and we started doing taste tests and things, it doesn't matter where we went. That is the best piece of steak I've ever eaten. Oh, wow. Man, look at that, And a few of our detractors, including some board members from the Angus Society, said, you can't tell anybody, but that's the best piece of steak I've ever eaten. So my ideals on it were that we needed to keep the carcass, make sure that we had easy-doing cattle, good feet, all the things that you need to do as a stud breeder of beef cattle, or cattle in general, bovines in general. My thoughts on it have always been that the cattle were a little bit on the smaller side for Australia, just on frame score alone. So what we have to do, and what I've tried to do over the last 20 years, is make sure that we kept trying to build on size without being giants and, big old Reiki frame 10s and things like this. That had nothing to do with what I'm saying in size. I'm talking overall size. So I've kept to that. Six Star need to be breeding to a situation where we can actually have more of what we had when we were in the Hereford breed, which was having a bull sale of 35 to 50 bulls that went out to commercial guys. Yep, fine, you might sell a stud bull every now and again, or more than likely these days you'll sell a bit of semen. But our goal is to be able to breed between 35 and 50 bulls that go to sale day. Now, to do that, as anybody that's breeding knows, you've got a lot of dropouts. You've got a lot of culls because of all sorts of things, if you're doing the job right. And secondly, even when you get them to the stage that you think, well, I'm going to have 50 bulls, I've got 60 there, what you start off with and what you actually get on sale day for, gummed up legs, bulls fighting, go through fences, all the things that happen. It takes a lot of work to get those bull sales. And I think our sales originally, the sales that we've had, and we've had 5 big ones, have been both bulls and females and embryos. But we're still breeding. I'm still breeding to be able to get to a stage where I have a specific bull sale.
That's it, with the commercial buyer in mind.
Totally.
If I'm to ask you the podcast signature question, how would you answer the question, why Speckle Park?
Oh, the steak. It's all about the meat. That's it. It has very little to do with there's no bells and whistles in Speckle Park. If people take away the aesthetic look and that they're pretty and the word cute gets used, of course, I stay away from it. I'll tell you a little story. There was in our first boardroom meeting, which was held at the kitchen of George Cousley's, the minutes were taken, and it was virtually a 20-minute meeting for the first meeting of SBI. And the first motion was moved that the word cute was not to be used within the breed. And it was put up by me and seconded by Mark Baker, and it was a unanimous decision. So that was the first motion moved in the Speckle Park Association. So, yeah. Why Speckle Park? The meat, the carcass is it. The other things follow on. But the one thing that your question is, why Speckle Park? It's because of the meat.
You must get immense pride when you consider now that Speckle Park is being served by some of Australia's leading chefs like Neil Perry, when 20 years ago, back when you were first learning about this breed, the authentic story of how you brought it out here included blind taste testing, for example. Yeah,
immense pride in it because, I've hit my head up against a brick wall for 20 years, trying to convince people. But it's a matter of, yes, it's the taste tests and it's the actual carcasses hung up that prove to people that Speckle Park is all about quality meat, and it can be bred, and it can be bred by F1s. We have an innate ability to take other breeds to a new level. And that's something that not many other breeds can do. Some breeds can add a lot of muscle. Some breeds can add a little bit more size. They can put a little bit more extra weight into them. They can put some docility into some of the Bos Indicus breeds. There's all things that some other breeds can do, but they can't beat us on meat quality. I don't care who tells you, and the Wagyu job has been one of the most interesting things. Yep, the meat quality in Wagyu is great. And when you eat marble score 8, 9 in Wagyu, it's beautiful and it's expensive. But there's a lot of people that once they do have an option between Speckle Park and Angus Cross Wagyu, once they actually get a chance to eat Speckle Park, I would expect that it's probably in what we've done over the years, and we've done it side by side with Wagyu Cross. 80% of people will take Speckle Park every day because it doesn't have that soapy, too much intramuscular fat, as you full well know, and all the information you're getting back. That fat, once you've cooked it, is not there, but you're still getting the omega-3. So we got a special product, a really special product. It's just a matter of continuing on doing what we're doing.
What are the breed's 3 biggest strengths and what are some of its weaknesses?
That's a very good question, Amy. I think the strengths go back to where I was just speaking. Our number one strength is our meat quality. One of the other things that I think is hugely is our ability to give the people that buy our bulls hybrid vigour, and it puts itself around the carcasses. So they're the things that we really find that are the pluses, the big pluses. The negatives within the breed, me personally, there are way too many bulls that are not good enough, that are out there being sold and used by people. The bulls should have been cut. I'm being pretty straightforward here, but there's way too many bad bulls out there that are not, they're not usable. They are usable, but they're of a detriment to our breed. They're just not good enough. Mm. And that's a really hard conversation that I think we have to have. We need to be diligent on what we keep as a bull, because when you get out there, it's just part of life, especially in the cattle industry. They always judge you on your worst, never on your best. So if you've got cattle out there that are in sale yards all across Australia and they're by very ordinary bulls that should not be bulls, and then all of a sudden they're at the sale yards, they look awful, they say, oh, meow, bloody Speckle Parks, have a look at them. Well, no. Yeah, they are Speckle Park cross, but they're Speckle Park cross that are not what we're all about. And it's a really hard conversation that I think we have to have as a breed. I think a lot of it is because they're cute, they're pretty. A lot of people are doing it because they love the cattle. I know some people that I've actually had conversations with some people. They won't mark the calves because it might hurt them. Mm. So, I mean, we've got some problems in that regard. So, but they're not problems of the breed. They're problems of the breeders.
Yes. Mm.
And
that's a very good point.
And what that does is it filters down to be a problem of the breed.
And it affects everyone.
Correct.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is a good one. What has been the biggest highlight of Six Star Speckle Park's journey so far?
As a purebred stud, I would say the breeding of Six Star Justice. Yeah.
Explain for those who aren't familiar about Six Star Justice.
Well, his proper handle, of course, is Six Star Southern Aurora Justice, R10. He was just as good a calf as I've ever bred of any breed, and I've bred Herefords, Romagnolas and Red Angus, and he was by far the best calf ever born, just to look at. And I like picking my calves out at about 3 days old. I got a good feel for them when they're born, but I like to go back at 3 days old when they're up, they're about, they're stretched out. Out of the 55 years of breeding purebred cattle, he just bang, he was just there, he was it straight away.
I remember you said to me once that you can get a good handle on animals when they're 3 days, 3 weeks and 3 months of age.
Correct. 100% right. Yeah, what you're saying is right, because I get an idea, and I've done it for all my life that I've been breeding, purebred cattle, that at 3 days I got a good feel for that bull early, but 3 days they're up, they're out. 3 weeks old, they're starting to get some shape to them, and at 3 months they're away.
And so for those that don't know, in the case of Justice, he went on to sell at auction to set a world record for a Speckle Park bull of 100,000, didn't he?
Correct, yeah. His EMA, I think, on that day was 124. He wasn't a show bull. We didn't particularly want to show him. He got shown in Sydney just as a yearling. We took him up to beef. Yeah, we took him up to beef, and he was calf champion up there. And that was it. We pulled him. We didn't particularly want to show him, only because we didn't want to put too much feed into the bull. I'm against too much feed for fertility problems that can come with it. They're not necessarily, they do. But so, yeah, we didn't show him much, but he was always outstanding. He has a beautiful depth of body, which is hard to get with roundness. He has the innate ability to do that. He's got perfect feet, big nuts, beautiful disposition, puppy dog quiet, and he was never handled much. really. It's just built into him. A great mum, a champion sire in Hawkeye, who's bred on and on, lots of different sires that have been bred by.
With the breed now heading towards being in Australia for 2 decades, it has had some highs and lows. Can you comment on what has led to those, and where do you see the opportunities and threats into the future?
I think the highs are the acceptance of the breed quite quickly as a beef breed with merit that could become a mainstream beef breed. And that was done via the carcasses and the carcass information that we were getting back in 2010, 11, 12. It was by the exhibition of those animals as steers and the interest that was caused by it. You know, they were the highlights of getting the breed accepted. Certainly the ability to have hybrid vigour and be such a success as an F1. The downside? I think the downside's been manufactured by our detractors, to tell you the truth. I'm sure of it. We have been targeted since day one by quite a few breeds, but especially the Angus people, that, you know, we don't want these guys in the market because a lot of these people know how good they are. And I think that's a negative that I really still find it hard to fathom why we keep getting knocked. The old colloquial word knocked, but, you know, that part of it really peeves me off. So I don't like that. It's not warranted, but it's a cruel world out there, and people get any advantage. And if in this case, if the advantage is to make sure that we are denigrated unfairly.
Yeah, definitely. Looking into the future, where do you see the opportunities and threats for the breed?
I still feel that the opportunities are untapped, totally untapped. Our future lies in making sure that our meat and our taste of the meat, our carcasses are out there for people to see, that we're getting kill data that's coming back consistently at 60-odd% on a lot of cattle. If they're bred right, and that there comes the proviso and the inverted commas, bred right. If you've got their bred right and you get those bulls out with other breeds into the Herefords and the Angus and Shorthorns or Limousins, even Charolais, you have an amazing hybrid vigour. It's worth a lot of money to the commercial guys. They just need to know that they can be done and not be led down the garden path by the detractors. That's the path that really is the future, is for us to keep proving to people that these carcasses and this meat is good. It won't make any difference what's happening in the show ring. That just doesn't make any difference whatsoever. You can win interbreed champions. They're great, everything else. We all like it, but it means nothing to the forward progress of the breed. It's all about the carcass and the meat.
Yeah, and that getting A, the hybrid vigour, but then B, getting 3, 4, 5% additional yield while maintaining that outstanding eating ability in the carcass. Wow.
It's a double whammy with Speckle Park because, yes, you get the hybrid vigour right to the pointy end of hybrid vigour. That's what I was saying, you know, anywhere between mostly when you're crossbreeding at F1, you're getting 18 to the full 25% that you can get out of a hybrid vigour. But then when you get them on the rail, they're taking animals that were killing at 56% and 58% good ones to an amazing 60, 61. I mean, the steer that caught my eye all those years ago at Calgary had a 69% yield. Like, it was amazing. Even the people in Canada couldn't believe it, like the other breeders. I said, no, this is not right. It was right. That yield and that dressing percentages are just amazing.
How does the Australian commercial beef industry differ from Speckle Park's motherland, Canada?
Oh, simply, we're basically grass-fed. The Canadian herd, which is way less than us, of course, that's the biggest difference. They're grain-fed and finished on grain, virtually 100%. and we here are primarily grass-fed.
And that's the system that really does suit this breed so well, doesn't it?
Correct. So much so, yes. We're in a situation where we can get the best of both worlds, especially I know that there is there is always a market for grain-assisted, grain-finished. If there was anything, going back to your original question a couple back on some of the negatives, we need to be careful that we don't have these cattle too small and dumpy that they run to fat too quickly, because feedlotters need to have those cattle at 100 days, spot on at 100 days. And we can get a lot of these cattle that stop growing and turn to fat too quickly. So that's it's just something that we have to be as purebred breeders, stud breeders, we must keep that in mind, that we need to keep our size up. I'm not talking about just not getting them lean. I'm talking about making sure they're big enough so that they do not stop growing when you've got them on that part of it.
Yep. How many trips have you made overseas to research Speckle Park genetics, and what has been the value in making those trips to view animals in the flesh?
Well, I think the last trip, which was last November, was my 120th trip to North America. And on the side of the Speckle Park, I suppose I would have done at least 60 trips there. Well, primarily for Speckle Park. And that's over the last 20 years. There were some years there at the beginning I was doing 3 trips a year to keep up on the genetics that we were bringing out, making sure we were getting the right ones, buying bulls, getting them into AI centres. I was spending 4 or 5 months a year over in Canada.
And what is the value in actually physically inspecting those animals in the flesh?
In my book, it's imperative that you look at your donors and when you go into an ET program, which you need to do from overseas, you need to know that cow. You should know the grandmother of that cow. You should definitely know how good the mother of the bull you're buying is, and preferably his grandmother. And to do that, you've physically got to see them. You can look at cameras, you can look at videos, you can look at photos, you can get people to describe them to you, but nothing beats your own eye. And don't forget, that's also something that's contentious, because people say, well, your eye is not as good as my eye, or I'm better than you. Well, okay, that's fair enough, but at least if you go over, you can actually make a decision yourself off your own eye, off your own instincts of breeding cattle. I think it's imperative that you make sure that you see your production cows.
What should Speckle Park breeders be doing more of or differently to share the breed's story, and especially the commercial relevance of the breed?
Lay down was there is get out, and if you're going to show and you're going to want to have them out in the public, show steers. Get out and show steers. And show steers that actually get their heads knocked off. We want people to show steers on the hoof and on the hook, because you cannot, in the industry we're in now, in 2026, we need to have carcass details, and we need to have the best carcass that we've got from F1s, very few purebreds around, and I can't see us ever having a huge purebred herd in Australia. It may happen. I won't be around, but it may happen. But our push is F1, so go out to your clients, find some steers, and if you want to show the best steers you can get, because they will be streets ahead of anything else we can do. Makes a huge difference.
Excellent. What role does data and objective measurement play in your decision-making processes in your stud, and why?
Well, I've probably been a little bit on the side of my own eye in front of data. And when it comes to the data, I've also been a person that likes raw data more so than EBVs. I know that all that EBVs and now genomics are certainly important. I take that by being with the guy that invented EBVs in Australia, Arthur Rickards. I knew Arthur from my time being on the Pole Hereford board, and before that in my younger days. And Arthur, till his passing, always said, our EBVs are a great tool but they are a tool. Use them as about 10% of your selection criteria. So I've kept to that. So data is important, yes. I don't like it being the be-all and end-all of everything. I still think that we need stud masters, for an old word. You need to have the craftsmanship of knowing what happens, what went before you, what the cows were, what the bulls were, what they look like. You've got to have a feel for it. But data, certainly. Well, I mean, as I said, we started SBI, and from day one, we had to be in breed plan. So it's not a denial thing or anything like that. It's a personal choice for me, but I think the genomics is a very interesting part of the development of the numbers game, in that sense. But for all the years that I've been going across to North America and South America, the really big herds that sell a lot of bulls that work and they keep coming back and they have the highest price bull sales are people that use figures, numbers straight out together with their own eye appeal and what they have as a gut feeling as a breeder. They use them both together, but neither being dominant.
That's it. It's not either or, it's both.
Yes.
And
Correct.
Data is only as good as the quality of the raw data being put into a system too, isn't it?
Totally. That's one of the things that, some people say, well, that bull there, he weighs 1,000 kilos, but he's been pushed, he's been grain-fed. The bull next to him is 750 kilos, but he hasn't been fed, or we don't think he's been fed. So the problem that I always find is it doesn't matter what you feed them, they can't get any bigger than what their genetics will let them. So the 750 kilogram bull could have been fed more than the 1,000 kilogram bull and only ever got to 800 because his genetics said he wouldn't. He'd just start laying down fat. So, the context of feed and fatness and overfed and things like that, it's all relevant to what you see with your eye. You know whether they're too fat, but at least you know that bull could get to 1,000. Some bulls that are at 750 that are not fed would never get to 1,000 anyway. And I'm not saying that that's not a magical number. I'm just giving that as an example.
There has been a push towards purebred commercial cattle breeding systems in Southern Australia at the expense of hybrid vigour, which you have already touched on a couple of times. And I guess to circle back on that, what are your thoughts on this seemingly growing push towards a purebred commercial system?
As a Speckle Park breeder, I don't think it's economical for most commercial breeders to go down that track. One, you pull yourself into a smaller gene pool, even ourselves in Speckle Park. We have purebred cattle, but we have quite a small, I won't say a detrimental small gene pool, but we have a small gene pool. Purebred cattle, to me, I think one of the things that my father always used to say to me was, when they stop paying you by the pound or the kilo is the time that you stop worrying about performance. And to get performance and more weight per day, F1s should always be in front of a purebred. It's just part of the bovine's way of genetics. So the F1s, to me, are still a more productive animal. And when you use, I'm going down the track of pushing Speckle Park, but so be it, because that's what I believe in. If you are going down that track of F1s being better than purebreds, you use a Speckle Park, you're getting that hybrid vigour, as we know, which is substantial, and you're getting the carcass, and you're getting the excellent meat quality. And all of that means that the bottom line, when you go, these commercial guys are going to go and sell 300 steers or 400 steers or whatever they're selling, 50 steers at a time. If they're making an extra 15 or 20 bucks or 50 bucks even more because they weigh more, it's all about making as much protein as we can get. We got to have quality, but in the bottom line, JBS paid per kilo for protein. Yeah, okay, it's beef protein, but that's what they pay for.
About 20 years ago, your DPI beef cattle officers back then all did push hybrid vigour, but it just seems in the most recent decade, with, I guess, in line with beef cattle officers being fewer on the ground too, but that education piece that we used to receive 20, 25 years ago isn't as loud, and hence where we are potentially.
Oh, no. I mean, I know, I remember distinctly 35 years ago, all your DPI, everybody was, oh, you've got a crossbreed.
Yeah,
and,
free lunch.
Yep. And the next cross, make sure it's a different one.
That's it.
It's F3, but it's got 3 different breeds in it. Keep doing it. I have no idea why the push would be so much on a purebred basis, except that I might be a little bit contentious here, but you're being certainly pushed down the track by the Angus Society, because there's so many blacks everywhere that those guys want you to buy Angus bulls to keep them black, and that's purebred black as far as they're concerned. And as I said, that's a little bit contentious, but I believe that.
What has been the most influential Speckle Park sire used to date at Six Star Speckle Park, and why?
Oh, stands alone. Spots and Sprouts stands alone, without a doubt.
You're not the first person on this podcast to say him either.
Oh. Well, put it this way. The day I found him, he was 5 months old, and he was out of a Lacerda 68L cow. They came out of a coulee in Canada in a mob of about 60 cows and calves at Spots and Sprouts at Dale and John's place. And he was a bit like Justice did to me 10 years later. He just got me. He was just bang. And since then, we showed him, we won shows with him. We took him to America. We took him to Denver. We were the first people with Not a Ranch. We were the first people to ever take Speckle Park to Denver. And we went for 5 years in a row. And he was our standout bull. And because he was aesthetically really nice, beautiful carcass on him, good nuts, good disposition, good feet. He was so sound. And then once we started breeding with him, he bred on. He's bred a lot of good sires himself, and his females are second to none.
That's it, both females and bulls.
Correct, yeah. Both just do a magic job. So for me, he's a standout. There'd be a close second, with old Lacerda, because Lacerda has kept performance up, which I'm a bit of a stickler for.
What are your goals for Six Star Speckle Park for the next 5 years?
Well, we've got some interesting things coming up. We're in an expansion mode even now. There'll be more to come, but we're going to be out about your way in central New South Wales, and it's going to give us the opportunity to have a few thousand acres. It'll allow us to up the ante again on our ET work out of our top cows and give us an opportunity to grow the herd. We'd like to get up to about 300 breeders and get us to the stage where, as I said earlier, to be able to have a bull sale of 40 to 60 bulls a year. So that's, it's quite exciting.
Excellent.
It's in the throes, and I would expect by the end of this year we'll have something to announce. But, we're hoping to up the ante. We're certainly backing Speckle Park to the hilt.
Excellent.
We know we have to keep working on it, and we know that we need good people around us. All of us need good people that are positive on what we're doing as a breed. As I said earlier, it's still such an exciting breed to be involved in. We just have to get more people out there with good cattle, getting them out into the commercial herds.
That's it. Fantastic. Watch this space, eh?
Yep.
Good stuff. What's the most important lesson you've learned in your career so far?
Base your breeding around cows, good cows. 70% of what you do in breeding a herd of good cattle comes from the female side.
Excellent.
Yep.
Who has been your most important professional mentor?
I've been very lucky in my life. I won't say one person because it isn't, because I've gone through a few decades now. So I've had a few people that have been very influential in a way that I hopefully have bred. In North America, I had 2 extremely good breeders that I was close to that helped me a lot and gave me a lot of good points on what to look for in cattle, and also on pedigrees, on how to use pedigrees. One was Louis Latimer of the famed Rimmental herds, Angus and Hereford herds, and the other was Glenn Klippenstein of Glenkirk Farms. Glenn's 85 an hour. He's still going great gangbusters. Both those gentlemen had different programs, but they certainly helped me understand, one, definitely on pedigrees and line breeding and just cattle knowledge in general, what to look for. Glenn Klippenstein was also an extremely good marketer of cattle, Herefords, and the way he promoted the breed over there. I've taken a lot of positives from what he taught me back in my early 20s. And then in Australia, I had two people I considered people that taught me a lot was Ken Mackay, Merriwa Pole Herefords, and a very good old mate of mine who I had a lot of time for was Ricky Pizzatura. Rick was a great cattleman.
Such a visionary.
Oh, he was years ahead of most people in the industry. I mean, he had a short-horn bull that he took to America and won national champion back in, it was early 70s, late 60s. Like, he was an amazing breeder. He brought out the Charolais. He perfected a lot of the better traits of the Charolais in his breeding. He brought out Marchiana's, Chianea, Romagnola when he had the Italian cattle. He virtually bred the whole part of the square metres. You know, he was just a great cattleman. He bred Pole Herefords and successfully, as well as the Shorthorns, his Charolais. You know, he was just a great cattleman. You know, the other thing with Rick, he was a visionary. He did a lot of stuff on feed conversion. He knew when to feed them and how long to feed them, not just show cattle, but he had great steers. He bred great steers and competed at Sydney Royal, Brisbane Royal in the steer competitions. Yeah, so those four guys had a lot to do with my career.
Fantastic.
As mentors.
What's one piece of advice you would give someone either starting a cattle stud or a commercial producer starting a cattle enterprise in their business?
Again, that's pretty easy, and it goes back to what I just said. Make sure your cow herd's right. Keep going. Make sure your cow herd's right. Doesn't matter whether you're commercial or stud. Get your cows right. If you get great cows, you're going to make a lot of money commercially, and you're going to make good money, great money out of having good stud cattle, so long as you've got your females right.
Right. What's one question that you wish I had asked you, and how would you have responded?
Oh, Greg, where are you going to be in 10 years' time?
Well, where are you going to be in 10 years' time, Greg?
Still pushing cows around and
that's the way.
And hopefully promoting Speckle Park.
Love it. Excellent. Last question of the day.
Yep.
What is your favourite quote and why?
Don't let detractors stop you from moving forward. Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I remember, it actually makes me think of a visit we had from US master breeder Jeff Ward, and I was struggling a bit at the time, and he looked at me and he said, "Amy, dogs don't bark at parked cars." So I had to think about that. And,
yep.
And it's a bit of a flaw in the Aussie culture, isn't it? The tall poppy syndrome too, and
very much so. Yes.
Got to push on, not believe, and then go hard.
Exactly. Yep. Don't stop.
That's it.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the Speckle Park podcast, Greg. I've hung on every word, and I'm quite sure the listeners will have too. That's been a fascinating story.
It's a pleasure. Great stuff. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.